There is a particular kind of silence that wealthy people use when they want to make you understand your place. It is not rude. It is not loud. It is the silence that follows after they ask what you do for a living and you give them an answer they consider beneath the conversation. They smile, they nod, they turn their attention to someone else, and you are simply gone from the room, even though you are still sitting in it. I have been on the receiving end of that silence more times than I can count, and every single time I have smiled back, and I have let them have it, because the moment a man feels the need to correct the picture other people have built of him, he has already lost something more important than the argument. My name is Henry Kowalski. I am 71 years old. I live in a bungalow on Hawthorne Crescent in a quiet neighborhood just outside Hamilton, Ontario, the same house I bought 38 years ago when my wife Adele was still alive, and our daughter Vivian was a freckled little terror who used to dig up my tulip bulbs because she thought they were treasure. The house has a slate roof that I keep meaning to replace, and a front porch where I sit most mornings with a cup of black tea, watching the gray go out of the sky over the maples on the boulevard. I drive a 2005 Ford Crown Victoria that my daughter has been gently begging me to retire for at least 4 winters now. It is the color of a very tired oyster. The driver's side window goes down whenever it pleases and refuses to come up about a quarter of the time, which is a problem I have addressed by simply not putting it down anymore. The car runs. The car has always run. I see no reason to apologize to anyone for that. I wear simple clothes. Dark trousers from the same Sears that closed in 2018 and that I had the foresight to buy 3 pairs of before they did. Plain shirts, mostly gray or pale blue, the kind a man wears when he has nothing he needs to prove to anyone walking past him on the sidewalk. My neighbor Frank Bergeron, who taught math at the high school for 34 years before they put him out to pasture, leaned over the fence one summer evening and told me I was the most boring rich man he had ever met in his life. I told Frank I wasn't rich. He laughed. I laughed. We talked about whether to plant garlic in the fall, and I went back inside and made myself a sandwich. What Frank doesn't know, and what nobody on Hawthorne Crescent knows, is that I am the principal owner of Meridian Northbridge Holdings. We are headquartered in Toronto on the 38th floor of a building most people walk past without looking up at, and we have controlling interests in commercial real estate from Halifax to Victoria, 3 regional logistics firms, a media outfit that publishes industry journals, and a private equity arm that has done very well for itself since 1991. Meridian Northbridge is structured through a chain of nominee companies and a family trust based out of Calgary, layered carefully so that my name appears on no public filing that anyone would ever go looking for. There is no Globe and Mail profile of me. There is no charity gala photograph. There is no Wikipedia page. I built it that way on purpose, one careful decision at a time, over 43 years of working, before the sun was up and going to bed, long after my daughter had finished her homework. The whole operation is worth a little over 2 billion Canadian dollars. I drive a car with a lazy window and an engine that knocks on cold mornings, and I would not change one thing about my life. Now let me tell you about my daughter, because she is the reason any of this matters at all. Vivian Kowalski-Doucet is 36 years old, and she is the finest piece of work I have ever had the privilege of being responsible for. She has her mother's gray eyes, and her mother's stubbornness, and a laugh that sounds like a bird trying to start an argument with the wind. She is a pediatric occupational therapist. She works with children who have suffered traumatic brain injuries. She is patient in a way I never learned how to be. When she was 9 years old, she asked me at the kitchen table why we couldn't take in the old golden retriever from down the street whose family had moved away and left him behind. And the case she made was so structurally sound that I drove down the block that same evening and brought the dog home. His name was Walter, and he lived for another 6.5 good years, and I learned then that this child of mine was going to win every fight she chose to have, so I had better be careful about which fights I picked with her. What I did not anticipate was who she would marry. 5 years ago, Vivian brought home Lucas Doucet. I want to be fair about Lucas. I have tried to be fair about Lucas for 5 years now, and I want to give him every opportunity that an older father-in-law owes a younger man who has chosen his daughter. So let me describe him as charitably as I can. Lucas Doucet is the human equivalent of a man who has just been told he is the most interesting person at the party and has decided to keep proving it for the rest of the evening. He is 41 years old, tall, with the kind of jawline that I am told women find arresting, and he has a habit of working three things into every conversation within the first 10 minutes. His MBA from a school in Switzerland, that he pronounces with a slight French inflection he did not have growing up in Sudbury, the sailboat he keeps moored in Kingston, and a story about a meeting he had once with a senator. He says the word senator the way a man says it when he very much wants you to ask which one. I never ask. I just nod, and I say that's something else, Lucas. And I let him keep talking, because letting a man like Lucas keep talking is generally how you find out everything you need to know about him. 8 months after he started dating my daughter, Lucas Doucet was named president and CEO of Halberd Freight Solutions. Now, I need you to pay close attention to this part, because the rest of the story turns on it. Halberd Freight is a mid-sized freight forwarding and logistics company headquartered in Mississauga. It has 610 employees, a healthy book of business with 2 of the largest grocery chains in the country, and very strong margins for its sector. Halberd Freight is one of the operating subsidiaries of Meridian Northbridge Holdings. We acquired it in 2009. The board of Halberd Freight reports up through a holding company that reports up through a trust that reports eventually to me. I am Halberd Freight's owner. I have been Halberd Freight's owner for 16 years. Lucas Doucet got the CEO job through what looked from every angle like a perfectly clean executive search. There was a national recruiting firm. There were 3 rounds of interviews. There was a board evaluation, reference checks, an offer letter drafted by an outside law firm, the works. From the outside, the process was textbook. What Lucas did not know, and still does not know, is that I directed every step of it from the floor of my study at home, with a cup of tea cooling beside the laptop. I read every interview transcript. I called 2 of his references myself, using a name that was not my name. I personally approved his compensation package, his relocation allowance, his stock equivalent bonus structure, all of it. I signed off on his appointment, and then I went out to the back garden and pulled weeds for an hour because the dirt under my fingernails has always been better company than the boardroom. He sent me a text message that night. Just got the call. CEO of Halberd Freight. Vivian and I are over the moon, excited to share more soon. I waited about 40 minutes, because a younger man's excitement should be allowed to breathe a little, and then I typed back. Wonderful news, son. You must have impressed them. Hard work, well rewarded. He sent a thumbs up. I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter and went to bed. I want to be honest with you. In the first year, I genuinely did try to like Lucas. I went to the dinners. I asked about the sailboat. I sat through a 40-minute monologue about his time in Lausanne. I was patient because I have learned over a long life that the version of a man you meet in the first 6 months is not always the version of a man you live with at year 3, and I have been pleasantly surprised by people before. Lucas did not pleasantly surprise me. He did the opposite, slowly, the way a tap drips into a basin until you realize one morning the basin is full. It started with little things. The way he would refer to my house as Vivian's dad's place, like I was a building feature rather than a person. The way he would correct my pronunciation of French words at family dinners, despite the fact that my mother was Acadian, and I have been speaking the language since before he was born. The way he asked Vivian, in front of me, if I had thought about downsizing yet, as if I were an inconvenient possession my daughter might soon need to manage. I let it slide. I let all of it slide. A man who is sure of himself does not need to win every small battle in his daughter's living room. Then came the company holiday party. Halberd Freight hosted it at a hotel ballroom in Mississauga 2 years ago. Vivian was busy at the hospital, and Lucas, in what I now understand was an unguarded moment of generosity, invited me along as his guest. I went. I wore my Sears trousers and a gray blazer that I have owned since 1998. I shook hands with people who had been working for me, technically, for years. And at one point, Lucas was introducing me to a small circle near the bar, 3 of his vice presidents, when one of them, a young man with too much cologne and too much confidence, asked me what I did. Before I could open my mouth, Lucas put a hand on my shoulder and said, "He's retired, Vivian's dad. Used to do something in administration, I think. Anyway, gentlemen, let me grab another drink." And he steered me out of the conversation the way a host steers a slow guest, toward the coat room. I smiled. I drifted toward the dessert table. I filed it away. But the moment that made the decision for me, the specific moment after which everything else became inevitable, came on a Wednesday in late September of last year. I had reason to be in the Halberd Freight Building that afternoon, on a quiet matter that had been routed to me through one of my holding company's representatives. I came in through the lobby like any other visitor, signed in under the name Henry Kowalski, was given a paper badge with my name spelled wrong, and was waved through. As I rounded the corner near the executive offices, I heard Lucas's voice carrying out of a glass-walled meeting room. The door cracked open, the way doors are cracked when the person inside believes nothing important is being said. He was talking to one of his senior managers. "Yeah, Vivian's dad, he's a sweet old guy," Lucas was saying. "Total small-town guy. Worked some kind of admin job his whole life. Retired with a small pension. The works. Drives this beat-up old Crown Vic. Owns this tiny little house in Hamilton. Vivian feels guilty about him, which I get, but honestly, between you and me, I think he peaked around the time Disco died." The other man laughed. "He's harmless, though," Lucas added more quietly. "Just a quiet little guy puttering around with his tomatoes. You know the type." I did not stop. I did not turn. I walked past that meeting room with the same unhurried pace I had walked into the building with, and I rode the elevator down, and I drove home in the Crown Vic with the radio off. Peaked around the time Disco died. Quiet little guy puttering around with his tomatoes. I let those words sit with me for 5 months. I did not raise my voice. I did not bring it up at Sunday dinners. I came to every family lunch. I asked about Lucas's sailboat. I helped Vivian carry groceries up to her condo on Saturday afternoons. I am a patient man, and I come from patient men. My grandfather, who emigrated from Poland in 1949 with one suitcase and a chipped tooth, used to say that the hammer does not need to argue with the nail. The hammer just waits for the right moment, and then it does its job in one clean motion. I waited. The dinner invitation came on a Tuesday evening in February. Vivian called me on her drive home from the hospital, sounding pleased and slightly nervous, the way she sounds when she is hoping I will say yes to something I might be inclined to say no to. Lucas's parents, Bernard and Camille Doucet, wanted to host all of us at their home in Oakville. They had been meaning to do this for ages, and now that Lucas had been settled in his new role for some time, they wanted to bring the families together properly. It would not be the first time I had met them. We had crossed paths briefly at the wedding 5 years earlier, and once at a Christmas brunch where Camille spoke to me for less than 4 minutes total, but it would be the first proper sit-down. "They really want to make a fuss," Vivian said. "Bernard has been planning the wine for 2 weeks. I told her I would be there." Then Lucas called me directly an hour later, which was unusual enough on its own to merit attention. He was friendly, casual, and a little too prepared. "Hey Henry, just wanted to give you a heads up about Saturday. Mom and Dad, they're sort of, formal people. Bernard's a bit old school about how dinners go, so it might be a good idea, if you don't mind me saying, to maybe wear something a little dressier than usual. Nothing crazy, just, sharper. Just so everyone's on the same page." There was a pause. "And maybe, hey, no pressure, but if you wanted to take an Uber instead of the Crown Vic, the driveway's a little tight up there. Just a thought." "Lucas," I said pleasantly, "I appreciate the consideration. I'll see you Saturday." I hung up before he had to come up with a follow-up. I stood in the hallway for a long moment after that call. Then I walked to my closet. I moved past the charcoal suit I had worn the day Meridian Northbridge closed our largest acquisition in 2014, the navy one I had worn to Adele's funeral in 2002, the one Vivian had helped me pick out for her wedding. I moved past all of them. I pulled out a clean pair of brown trousers, a flannel shirt the color of weak coffee, and a cardigan my daughter had once described, with great affection, as the color of disappointment. I laid them out on the bed for Saturday. Then I walked out to the driveway and patted the roof of the old Crown Vic, the way a man pats the shoulder of a friend before a long drive. "We're going to dinner, old girl," I said. "They want humble. We have humble in stock." Because here is what Lucas Doucet did not understand. Here is what Bernard and Camille Doucet, sitting in their house in Oakville polishing the wine glasses, did not understand. I was not dressing down because I had nothing better. I was dressing down because the only honest way to find out who someone really is to give them every reason to assume you are no one worth performing for. And I had a feeling, a long, slow, 43 years in the making feeling, that Bernard and Camille Doucet were about to tell me everything I needed to know. Saturday came up gray and cold, the way Saturdays in February do in southern Ontario, with the kind of low sky that makes the lake look like sheet metal. I made my tea. I read the paper. I sat at my kitchen table and watched a chickadee work over the feeder for a long while. I dressed the way I had decided to dress. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror, and I thought, yes, that is exactly the man they are expecting. I went out to the driveway. The Crown Vic started on the second turn of the key, the engine clearing its throat in the cold the way an old man clears his at the breakfast table, and I drove west along the QEW toward Oakville, with the heater running on a setting somewhere between ineffective and aspirational. The Doucet house sat at the end of a long driveway lined with cedars that had been pruned within an inch of their lives. The house itself was one of those new builds designed to look old, white stone facade, 2-story columns, a portico that did not actually shelter anything from any kind of weather. There was a young man parking cars in the circle out front, although there were only 3 cars to park, including mine. He looked at the Crown Vic, looked at me, looked at the Crown Vic again, and arranged his face very carefully. "Good evening, sir. I can take that for you." I handed him the keys. "She runs a little rough at idle, son. Don't be alarmed." He nodded the way a young man nods when he is trying very hard not to have any further opinions about the situation he has been placed in. Bernard Doucet opened the door before I could knock. He was a tall man, late 70s, with the specific kind of carriage that comes from a lifetime of being the most senior person in most rooms. "Henry," he said, extending a hand. "So glad we could finally do this properly." His handshake was exactly as long as it needed to be, and not 1 second longer, I noticed. The house inside was what I expected. Coffered ceilings, art on the walls that had been chosen by someone who consults a magazine rather than a feeling, a staircase that wound up and around like it was charging admission. Camille Doucet appeared from a corridor, in the way wealthy women of a certain age appear, assembled rather than arrived, with jewelry that announced itself the way jewelry announces itself when it is meant to be the second thing you notice about a person. "Henry," she said, taking both of my hands, "you are exactly as Lucas described. So sweet." There it was. Sweet. The word people use about old dogs and elderly relatives who do not quite track the conversation anymore. "Thank you, Camille," I said. "You have a beautiful home." She brightened, because people who have built an identity around their square footage never tire of being told the square footage is impressive. Vivian came across the room and hugged me, and I held that hug for half a beat longer than I usually do. "You look great, Dad," she whispered. "You too, sweetheart," I said. Lucas appeared behind her shoulder. He looked at my outfit, and there was that flicker, half a second, the briefest tightening at the corner of his mouth, and then the recovery smile slid into place. "Henry, glad you made it. Come on in. Bernard's pouring something special." Something special. I would learn over the course of the evening that this was the operating theme of the Doucet household. The wine was something special. The lamb was something special. The art was something special. The family was something special. The only thing in the room that was, by the unspoken consensus of 3 of the 4 people at the table, not particularly special, was me. We sat down. The dining table was set for 6, even though there were only 5 of us, because Camille was the kind of woman who left an empty place setting the way other people leave a candle burning, just so you would notice the symmetry. The crystal glasses were heavy. The silverware was the kind that announces itself when you set it down. I unfolded my napkin. I admired the centerpiece. I asked Camille thoughtful questions about the renovation. I complimented the wine before I had tasted it. And I watched. Bernard ran the conversation the way men like Bernard run conversations, from the top of the table, with full confidence that what he had to say was the reason everyone had gathered. He spoke about the markets. He spoke about a cottage he had recently sold in Muskoka. He spoke at length about Lucas's unbelievable instincts at Halberd Freight. "The boy has completely turned that company around," Bernard said, swirling the wine. "The board adores him. I always knew he had it in him. Leadership runs in the family." He glanced at me when he said this. Just briefly, the kind of glance a man gives when he wants to plant a contrast without having to plant it out loud. I nodded warmly. "That's something else," I said. "You must be very proud." Then Camille turned her attention to Vivian. "And Vivian," she said, in that warm, instructive voice that older women use when they are about to say something that is not warm at all, "you must feel so secure with a husband who provides at the level Lucas does." It is such a relief, isn't it? Not every young woman is so fortunate, especially when she comes from, and she paused here just long enough to be unmistakable, more modest beginnings. The table went quiet for half a second. I watched Vivian's face. She kept her smile up, but I saw her eyes go flat, the way they used to go flat when she was 12, and a teacher had said something thoughtless to her at parent night. She picked up her water and took a sip. Lucas did not come to her defense. He was looking down at his plate, smiling slightly, as though Camille had said something charming. I picked up my own water. I took a slow sip, and I said absolutely nothing, because I knew, with the still certain knowledge of a man who has been patient for a very long time, that the envelope had not arrived yet, and that when it did, every single thing at this table was about to look different. The envelope arrived with the cheese course. Bernard reached down beside his chair and produced a slim leather portfolio, the kind a lawyer carries when he wants you to know he is prepared. He set it on the table. He smoothed it once. He slid it across to me with a gravity that was entirely staged. "Henry," he said, "there is something the family has been wanting to discuss with you. We wanted to do it properly, in person." I did not touch the portfolio. Camille's hands were folded in her lap. Lucas had straightened his back. Vivian was looking at the portfolio, and her shoulders had pulled in just a little, the way they used to when she was younger and unsure what was coming. "Lucas," Bernard continued, "has a vision. An independent venture. His own logistics consultancy, leveraging his executive experience. The kind of opportunity that only opens once in a man's career. We've been working with our advisors on the structure for a few months now." "That's exciting news," I said. "Congratulations, Lucas." "Thank you," Lucas said, with the careful smile of a man trying not to show his teeth too soon. "The launch capital," Bernard went on, "is the only outstanding piece. And what we have proposed in this document, which has been drafted by very competent people, is a perfectly clean arrangement. Vivian's eventual inheritance, formalized now, used as collateral against the founding loan. It would be held in trust, of course, properly papered, above board. We just need your sign-off, Henry, as her father, to put the family stamp on it." He paused. "We also took the liberty of including a clause that would allow Lucas to redirect a portion of those funds in the early years for working capital with the family's consent." He smiled. Camille smiled. Lucas smiled. Vivian did not smile. I looked at the portfolio. I looked at Bernard. I looked at Camille, whose smile had the specific stillness of a woman who has rehearsed how this part goes. I looked at Lucas, calm, certain, already mentally spending money he had decided was his. And I thought, you have absolutely no idea who you just slid that envelope across to. I picked it up. I opened it. I read every page slowly and carefully, the way I have read every contract that has crossed my desk for the better part of 50 years, while the candles flickered, and Camille refilled the wine, and nobody at that table said one word. The document was, to its credit, professionally drafted. It was also, to anyone who actually understood the language, a beautifully constructed mechanism for transferring my daughter's financial security into a venture controlled entirely by her husband and his parents. There were 3 clauses I would have caught in my first year of business school. There was a 4th that I suspect Bernard's lawyer was hoping nobody would read closely. I closed the portfolio. I set it gently back on the table. I picked up my water, took one slow sip, and I looked at Bernard with the warmest smile I have. "Bernard," I said, "I can see a lot of thought has gone into this. I would like to take it home and review it carefully." Bernard exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for 20 minutes. Lucas's shoulders dropped 1/4 of an inch. Camille reached for her wine with the relieved movement of a woman who believes the difficult part of the evening is now safely behind her. They thought they had won. I stayed for another 40 minutes. I complimented the lamb honestly because the lamb was, in fact, very good. I admired the cheese. I shook Bernard's hand at the door, a full handshake this time, my eyes on his for 1 second longer than the situation strictly required. He did not know what that second meant. The young man brought the Crown Vic around and handed me the keys with an expression that suggested he had made his peace with the car. I tipped him generously, more than he was expecting, and watched his face change. I drove home along the QEW with the heater wheezing and the lake black and motionless to the south, and I was so calm it would have unsettled anyone who knew what I was about to do. I said nothing for 16 days, not a word. I did not call Vivian. I tended the garden, even though it was February, and there was nothing to tend. I had coffee with Frank Bergeron on Wednesday. I went to Mass on Sunday. I shoveled the driveway. On day 4, Lucas texted me, "Hey Henry, just checking in. Hope you got a chance to look at the proposal. Pretty exciting stuff, right?" I waited 4 hours. Then I typed, "Still reviewing it carefully, son. These things deserve patience." He sent a thumbs up. I put the phone down and made a phone call. Not to Lucas. To 3 very specific people. The senior independent directors of Halberd Freight Solutions, men who have known me for years and who understand, when I call directly, that the call is not a social one. "Run the audit," I said quietly. "Full scope, begin immediately, discreet." Then I went out to the back porch and sat with my tea, and I waited. Because here is what Lucas Doucet did not know, and what Bernard Doucet, sitting in his house in Oakville congratulating himself, did not know. I had drafted Lucas's employment contract personally. Every clause, every line, including a fiduciary duty and non-compete provision buried in Section 12, which Lucas had signed without reading carefully enough, because nobody who is being handed a CEO title at 41 ever reads Section 12 carefully. I had written the substance of that clause 19 years before Lucas Doucet ever entered my daughter's life. I had written it for exactly the kind of man who would one day be sitting in the corner office believing he had outsmarted the people who put him there. The audit findings landed on my desk 12 days later. I sat with the report for a long time. Not because I was surprised. I was not surprised. I sat with it because I wanted to be absolutely certain, the way a good carpenter measures twice, before I did what came next. Lucas Doucet had been building his independent consultancy for 9 months. On company time. Using company laptops. Using Halberd Freight client relationships, 3 of which he had been quietly soliciting to follow him to the new venture once it launched. 2 of his direct reports were already informally signed up. A draft pitch deck described his consultancy as offering services that would have competed directly with Halberd Freight's own logistics arm. Every email, every calendar entry, every document, all of it on company servers, all of it a textbook violation of the clause he had signed. All of it now in a binder on my desk on a Thursday morning when I put on the dark gray suit from the back of my closet, knotted a tie I had not worn in 2 years, and drove the Crown Vic into Mississauga. I parked in the reserve space at the front of the Halberd Freight building, the one with the brass placard that read, "Meridian North Bridge Reserved," the one Lucas had driven past 4 times a week for 2 years, without ever once asking whose name belonged to it. I walked through the lobby. The receptionist did not recognize me. I asked her to call up to the boardroom and let them know that Mr. Kowalski had arrived. I sat at the head of the boardroom table, 3 directors to my left, 2 lawyers to my right, the audit binder in front of me, and in approximately 6 minutes my daughter's husband walking through the door under the impression that he had been called in for a routine quarterly review. The door opened. Lucas walked in carrying his usual confidence, the way a man carries an umbrella he has never actually had to use. He took in the room, the directors, the lawyers, the binder, and then his eyes found me, sitting at the head of his boardroom, in his company, in a suit he had not known I owned. I watched it happen in real time. The recruitment, the contract, the audit, the dinner, the envelope. 5 years of his life rearranging themselves on his face, floor by floor, like an old hotel where the lights were coming on one window at a time. The silence ran for 9 full seconds. I let every one of them land. "Sit down, Lucas," I said. He sat. "I am going to say this once," I said, "and I am going to say it without raising my voice, because anger is the tool of men who did not see the situation coming. I saw this coming the day you slid your business school transcript across my kitchen counter 5 years ago and told me you were the kind of man my daughter deserved." I opened the binder. Halberd Freight Solutions is a wholly owned operating subsidiary of Meridian Northbridge Holdings. Meridian Northbridge is owned by me, has been since 1991. The company you have been running, the salary you have been drawing, the title that you have been wearing as your entire personality for 2 years, all of it exists because I built the structure that contains it. I appointed you to that role because I believed, against the advice of 2 of the gentlemen sitting at this table, that you could grow into it. For 9 months, you have used the resources of this company to build a venture designed to compete against the hand that fed you. I closed the binder. The clause in your contract is enforceable, and the audit findings are airtight. Our outside counsel is prepared to pursue the full remedy. However, I said, I am not interested in destroying you. I am not even interested in punishing you. I am interested in resolution. So here is what is going to happen. You will tender your resignation effective today, citing personal reasons. Your reputation in this industry remains intact. The findings of this audit stay inside this room. Or we proceed through the courts, and every line of every document in this binder becomes part of the public record. He looked at the directors. None of them looked back. He looked at the lawyers. They looked at their notepads. He looked at me, and what I saw in his face was not the response I had expected. It was not anger. It was not bluster. It was shame. Real, unperformed shame, the deep, quiet kind, the kind that comes the first time a man sees himself with no story to hide behind. I'll resign, he said, and the words came out smaller than he probably meant them to. Good, I said. I stood. I buttoned my jacket. I picked up the binder. One more thing, I said at the door. The proposal your father slid across the table at dinner 3 weeks ago. Vivian's inheritance, leveraged as collateral. I want you to understand something. My lawyers transferred her inheritance into a personal trust in her sole name on Monday morning, irrevocably. Her signature is the only one that activates it. There is no inheritance left to leverage in the form your father proposed. Tell Bernard and Camille I appreciated the lamb very much. It was excellent. I drove home in the Crown Vic. The window stayed up the whole way, which I took as a small kindness from a friend. The engine knocked at one stoplight on Highway 5 and then settled. I pulled into the driveway on Hawthorne Crescent and I sat for a minute. Just sat. And I thought about 38 years of being the man no one ever turned around to look at, and knowing exactly who I was the entire time. I patted the dashboard once. Good girl, I said. I called my daughter. She came over 20 minutes later and found me at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea already poured and the cardigan back on. She sat down across from me and looked at my face the way she has looked at my face since she was a little girl. Dad, she said, tell me. I told her everything. The company, the structure, the appointment, the clause I had drafted 19 years ago, the audit, the boardroom, the inheritance transfer. I told her the whole thing in order, slowly, with no embellishment. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long time, looking down at her hands. Then she looked up at me, and her eyes were full and steady, and she asked the question I had been carrying the answer to since the afternoon she was born. Dad, she said, why did you never tell me any of this, not even when I was an adult? I looked down at the cup in front of me. I looked out the kitchen window at the bare maple in the backyard, the one Adele and I had planted the spring after we moved in. I looked back at my daughter, at her mother's gray eyes in her face, at the little girl who had once made a structurally sound argument for a stray dog at this same table. Because I wanted you to choose your life, I said, not have it chosen for you by what I happen to own. I wanted you to fall in love with people, and a career, and a way of being that had nothing to do with me. I wanted, when you looked at me, for you to see your father, not a balance sheet. She started to cry. I held her hand across the table and I let her. We sat like that for a while, in the quiet kitchen, with the steam coming off 2 cups of tea and the chickadee back at the feeder outside the window. I want to leave you with a few things, because at my age you stop being interested in the story for its own sake, and you start being interested in what the story is for. So here it is, plainly. There is no virtue in shouting about what you have. The people who matter will see you eventually, and the people who do not see you were never going to be in your life for the right reasons in the first place. Do not measure a person by the car they drive, or the cardigan they wear, or the way they pronounce a French word. Measure them by how they treat the waiter, the parking attendant, the quiet old man at the end of the table. Teach your children that worth is something you build inside yourself, where no one can take it from you, and not something you wear on the outside, where any change in the weather can wash it off. Be patient. The river does not argue with the rock. It just keeps moving, and one morning the rock is gone, and the river is still there, and that is the only argument that ever mattered. If a man tells you who he is when he thinks no one important is listening, believe him the first time. And if you have spent your life being underestimated by the wrong people, take some quiet comfort in this. The people who are too busy looking past you are usually the ones who never see what is coming. The ones who see you, who really see you. In a flannel shirt and a tired car and a small house on a quiet street, those are the ones worth keeping. Those are the ones you build a life around. My daughter is one of those people. She always was. That, in the end, is the only thing I built that I am genuinely proud of. If this story meant something to you, stay a while. There are more of them where this came from, and I will see you in the next one.